Just want to start on this Friday. Just want to bring you latest on this coronavirus situation. This is a breaking news story in a developing situation. We're hearing that 2 patients in England who are members of the same family have tested positive for this. This is the Chief Medical Officer in England making this announcement. He says that the patients are receiving specialist NHS care. They're using tried and tested infection control procedures to prevent further spread of the virus. So the Department of Health has not said where in England this family is, but it is understood they are not in the Wirral area. And the reason we're mentioning the Wirral area, special facilities.
So this is a special quarantine centre that's been set up. We've got Dr Sara with us this morning. So this flight is on its way from Wuhan in China.
Yeah.
We have got 83 Brits on board, 27 foreign nationals, and this is due to arrive in Brize Norton, possibly in our airtime, maybe a little bit later. And then the 83 British people will be taken to the quarantine centre. This is at the Arrow Park Hospital on the Wirral. What happens then, Sara? Because this is starting to sound a little bit scary. It's like those films we see with lots of people in white suits and masks and people being isolated.
So, to reassure you, the NHS are brilliant at managing infections. We know we're well prepared and we know how to quarantine and we know how to manage infections like this. We worry more about people who have underlying health conditions, the elderly, the very young, but for the general population, catching the coronavirus is not lethal. We do need to remember that.
What are the symptoms? Because, you know, listen, you can hear my husband today who's got a terrible cough and a cold, but there might be people who are spluttering and coughing and thinking they just had a cold or flu.
Well,
how would you know?
Coronavirus is a cold.
So the set of coronaviruses can vary from the common cold all the way to something more severe like SARS, but obviously this is a novel type of coronavirus. The main symptoms are fever, cough, and respiratory difficulty, so shortness of breath. And if you get to that point, it needs further investigation.
And the quarantine is with it can take up to 5 days. You're incubating this virus. So these people who are flying back from China today, it might all seem fine, but they could develop the virus.
So you could go on to develop it. So you may not know that you have it there and then, but you may then develop it after.
OK, Doctor, thank you very much indeed. Want to go to a specialist in all of this. University of Nottingham, Professor Jonathan Ball, with this one. Professor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's here. It's eventually arrived in the UK. It was only ever going to be a matter of time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and that's why the NHS has been on alert for this. That's why the status has risen to moderate in terms of the likelihood of there being a coronavirus infection. There are 2 cases. It's scant detail at the moment, but as has just been pointed out, the NHS is ready to deal with them without causing any risk to the rest of the UK.
So when the World Health Organization declares, as they did yesterday, this public health emergency, does that make us more frightened or does it make us safer?
It should make us safer because that heralds a recognition that this outbreak has the potential to cause serious problems around the world. And as was flagged by Dr Tedros's introduction to the announcement, it's the main worry are countries that don't have the same kind of infrastructures that we have, the same kind of surveillance systems that we have. Those are likely to be potential breeding grounds for this virus to amplify in humans and then to cause us further problems down the line. So at the moment, in places like the UK, then the risk of this virus taking a hold and transmitting and travelling is low because we pick it up very quickly. We isolate patients, we give them care, and that stops it.
But as you said, Professor Ball, it is very contagious, and you know they're obviously not naming the 2 people who are members of the same family or even where they're from in England. There might be people now saying, "Well, say I've come into contact with those people. You know, how contagious is this?"
Well, what the NHS will be doing now is identifying the people who have come into contact with those individuals and monitoring them to see whether or not they develop the infection. What we do know from other countries, for example, Germany, that had the biggest outbreak, and that was 1 patient travelling from Wuhan. They returned to Wuhan and started to feel unwell. Somebody who'd been in contact with them then became infected and passed the virus on to 2 other people. So we're looking at very, very small onward chains of transmission, and this is the benefit. If it's just 1 or 2 cases that we pick up, you know, you could even have tens, and maybe even 100, and that wouldn't cause us a problem because we have the infrastructure available to isolate these individuals and, importantly, to track who they've been into contact with and monitor them.
Professor, please stay with us. We would like to go to the special unit that has been set up at Arrow Park. We've got, and this is, I believe this is outside the Royal Liverpool Hospital, ITV Granada reporter Andy Bonner there on Merseyside to tell us more. Andy.
Yeah, Eamonn, let me correct you. It's actually about 6 miles away from the Royal Liverpool Hospital. Let me tell you, first of all, this containment unit, the quarantine centre, is at Arrow Park Hospital in nursing accommodation here. That's where we're expecting the 83 people on that flight from Wuhan to come to later today, probably this evening, we expect now with the delays on that flight. And it's in the accommodation here that they will spend 2 weeks in quarantine by themselves. Now, the reason, one of the reasons that this might have been chosen as a site is because at the Royal Liverpool Hospital, 6 miles away from here, as I say, there is a specialist centre called an HCID centre where they can isolate any patients who do have the coronavirus, and they can be treated there to try and stop it spreading. So that's probably why this site has been chosen. It's one of only 4 centres in the country that can do that over at the Royal.
Right, so if I'd like to go back to the Professor now just on this. So, Professor, if we're talking about the isolation unit, we're talking about the hospital in general there. Right, so say you live in the Liverpool area or you're on Merseyside. The fact that people who are infected or suspected of being infected are being brought to your area, does that in any way increase the risk of infection on Merseyside?
No, not at all, because the people who are being brought back are being isolated, and they're being monitored very carefully, very frequently, and therefore, if any infection does develop, then they can be given the healthcare that they require. And as the reporter just pointed out, what that basically means is that you isolate that patient. They're in a separate room, and anybody who has contact with them is properly protected with personal protective equipment, things like a respirator, a gown, gloves, eye goggles. And whenever they leave that patient's room, those are disposed of, and they're disposed of safely. So anything going into that room, when it comes out, is disposed of safely.
Professor, we're watching people there, who, just as you were talking, who are boarding the plane from Wuhan, all with their masks on. Will those people be individually quarantined? So are they all in this centre together, or will they, each one of them, have to be in a separate room quarantined on their own?
That's a detail that I'm not privy to. I mean, certainly there will be the potential to keep them in single isolation. Whether or not that's deemed necessary, I wouldn't like to comment on, but it's certainly feasible and certainly possible. Remember that the actual likelihood of those people actually having the coronavirus is still fairly low. Even though they've come from Wuhan, where there are thousands of cases, for each one of those individuals separately to have that coronavirus is still a low probability.
Professor Ball, thank you for your time this morning. Just back to you, Sara, then. I suppose through all that, I said the scenes look scary. They look like some of those films that we've seen years ago, thinking that will never happen. But it is a keep calm. You know, don't panic. If you get a bit of a sniffle or a cough or a cold, you don't necessarily have
Exactly. Don't panic. As Prof Ball said, the likelihood that this is going to spread is minimal because we have the infrastructure in place to keep that from happening. Okay. If you do get worried, please do call your GP, have a chat with them, and they'll be able to help you. Yeah,
well, that flight is due to arrive, we think, at about 12:30, so it might be just after our airtime. Obviously, if it's during our airtime, we will get back to you with that story.
Yeah, so we've got there Andy Bonner from Granada ITV there on the scene, so we'll be able to go back when the plane lands and any activity around the isolation unit there at Arrow Park on Merseyside. So keep it here. We'll bring you all the latest information on that. Just to confirm, 2 patients in England, members of the same family, not named, their location not named, have tested positive for coronavirus.